Hello, welcome to this session on critical thinking. In this session, we'll look at what is critical thinking and some definitions around that concept and what you might understand that concept to mean. We'll look at why it's needed, what are the benefits of critical thinking. We'll also look at how it can be applied in reading, writing and listening. These are all things that will be of interest to you for your course, but also out in the workplace. We'll then move on to looking at useful tools which can support your critical thinking, so things that you can use after the session. And we'll be trying out some of those useful tools within the activities we've set in this session. And as we go through those activities, you can just pause this presentation, have a think about the activities, maybe have a pen and paper around to write any notes down, or just think out loud and then come back to the session and we'll talk about how you got on. And then lastly, we'll be looking at some further help and support that can keep you going after this session. So our first activity is a warm-up exercise, just 5 minutes. I'll talk you through this and then you can just pause for a few moments, then come back, and then we'll just talk through some of these concepts that we'll be looking at. So imagine this activity, we're looking at facts and opinions from a blank page point of view. So imagine you're a tour guide for an alien, you're up above Earth in a spaceship with an alien, you're visiting Earth and observing human life. Now imagine you are floating over a football stadium where a professional football game is being played, and the aliens are asking you to answer some of their questions because they are puzzled and a little bit confused about what the scene is below, what's going on. So in order to explain what's happening to them, have a think about some of these questions below, and don't worry if you don't get through all of these, just have a think about them. So they may ask, what's a game? What's happening down there? Why are there no female players? And we just assume for the process of this exercise that it's a professional football game played by males. And why do people get so passionate about watching other people play games? And if you're not familiar with football, you can think about other games or other types of sport, or maybe other types of sport like athletics or even the Olympic Games. And what is a team? Have a think about that concept, because that's something that might be more familiar to most of you in the course of your studies or your work. So have a think about those for a few moments, and don't worry if you don't get through all of these questions. Okay, so just pause. Okay, so we'll come back to these questions and we'll just talk through them. And don't worry, there's no such thing as a sort of silly question or a sort of silly answer to these. There's no right or wrong here. But it's really just to get us looking at our values and assumptions, because that's something that will be very important as we go through this session in looking at the way you think critically. So what is a game? Well, in a game, some of you may have come up with the idea that, yes, it's a competition and there are winners and losers. Now, why is it important to have a winner? What is the importance of that value we put on being a winner? And that's something, again, that's quite complex to explain to those that aren't familiar with this, in the importance of winning or losing that particular game. And why are there no female players? Well, in this particular match, we've assumed it's being played by men, but we could argue equally that we do also have female football players, and there are many countries that have women's football leagues, and indeed only a few years ago we had the Women's Football World Cup that was played across the world. So they don't necessarily have to be just men playing. Indeed, it's very unusual for men and women to be playing at the same time, because they have different skill sets and different strengths, but we can of course have those matches being played separately, so you can argue that. But it's really just to get you looking at that particular question, that concept, and questioning it. Why is that? And why do people get so passionate about watching other people play games? Well, sometimes it's quite nice to be part of a community, isn't it? We kind of get behind particular players, particular teams. It might even be particular personalities. For example, in the Olympic Games, we might be behind our particular country's team, or we might support a particular sports man or woman in their particular field because we are fans, or we really enjoy watching that particular sport. And lastly, what's a team? And this might be something that's more familiar to most of you as you've come across this in the workplace or in your studies. Now, a team in football can consist of defenders, those players that play on the attack. There may be strikers, midfielders, and there's obviously a player in goal who has to save goals. Now, each player has a different skill set that complements each other within that team. And in your teams, you might find you're maybe working as a group, putting a presentation together. And you might find that there's one particular person in your team who's good at presenting. There might be another member of the team who's good at graphics and can put those together for a presentation. And then there might be somebody else who's good at maybe putting the content together for that presenter to deliver. So you're all working together, you complement each other, and you're working together for a common aim in that particular case within a team. So next we're going to have a look at some definitions around critical thinking. So what is it? And there are many definitions. We could probably go on for a while talking about different definitions, but I've just chosen one here that's taken from Skills for Study, which is an online resource that we have available to us across the university. And critical thinking in this particular instance is the process of looking at ideas and information critically. So we're not taking anything for granted, but we're questioning the accuracy of what we're reading, of what we're seeing. We're looking at the arguments or the inferences, and we're trying to seek new ways of understanding and connecting those ideas together and maybe combining them in different ways. But this, you must remember, it doesn't mean never believing anything. But what we do is acknowledge the possibility that at any one time, what we do know may only be part of the picture. So there might be things, facts that are missing. There might be gaps in those pieces of information that we're receiving or reading or listening to. So just bear that in mind. What might be missing? So what are the benefits of critical thinking? Well, once you get skilled at thinking critically, there are a number of benefits, and I've just listed a few here. And the first one is saving you time. So you will get quite adept at identifying key information very quickly and accurately. So that will then improve your attention and observation skills. So you're looking out for that information, you're able to find it more quickly. Focuses your reading, and it enables you to question that information and look at those arguments in the text. Then you will get more of an understanding on how to get your point across more effectively, and also it'll improve your critical reflection skills. And you might find you've maybe been out in practice, or you've had a work placement recently as part of your course or previous work experience where you have done something that went right, and you think, actually, I could apply that somewhere else. That worked really well. Likewise, you might find something didn't work so well. and you had to improve on it or modify that particular method you use. So these are all ways of reflecting on what you've done, focusing on your own experiences and maybe applying them differently next time or in a different context or a different discipline. And these skills of analysis can be applied in other situations, including the workplace, so not just on your academic course. So now we're going to have a look at how employers view critical thinking skills. And I've got some quotes here. One from the CBI, which is the Confederation of British Industry here in the UK. And they've surveyed employers over several years, and they found that they have an ongoing demand for critical thinking skills and for those associated abilities such as problem solving. In the USA, a survey found that over 93% of employers place more value on the ability to think critically and solve problems than they do on the degree subject, which is very interesting. So those critical thinking skills are really important, almost more so than the subject that's being studied. In China, employers are also looking for soft skills such as communication, innovation, and taking the initiative in problem solving. And the lack of these skills have been linked to gaps in critical thinking abilities. So all three areas there all agreeing that critical thinking skills are really important within the workplace. So you might be thinking, well, how can I apply critical thinking skills to my work or study? Well, those particular skills are ways of engaging with the subject matter on your course. So you might look at things in a different way, different points of view and alternative interpretations. You can debate with others on your course. You can enter in a critical dialogue with your course leader or within your seminar groups and look at the material in different ways. It also helps you to make better informed decisions about whether information is likely to be true. And many of you may have come across fake news, and this is where we have to look at those arguments being put forward by different areas. You know, which arguments are persuasive, why are they persuasive, and critical thinking will allow you to question particular arguments, but then find out that, you know, the evidence, look at the evidence that's there, but maybe spot some of those gaps. Why are the gaps being left there? Why has that particular argument not been put forward? Critical thinking can also help you make a more structured approach to reading, listening and writing. And we'll now look at each of these three areas in turn, so that it will make it a little bit more straightforward for you when you're looking at doing your own research and knowing what to include in those particular pieces of work you're putting together. So with reading, critical thinking involves looking at the line of reasoning or the argument that the author is putting together within the text. So within that journal article, within that book chapter, on that website. There might be different mediums we're using. We might also be evaluating the line of reasoning. We're questioning those appearances or the hidden assumptions that the author is putting forward. Where did they find that evidence? And again, this leads to the next point, identifying the evidence that they're using. Where is it from? And we might find, that's a really good source. How can we maybe combine that with another piece of evidence that we've found? We're evaluating the evidence according to valid criteria, and this is something we'll look at in a few moments. We're also looking at the writer's conclusions, because we may come to similar conclusions ourselves, or we might have other evidence that gives conflicting reviews alongside that. So that's reading. With listening, this involves the same awareness as when reading, but we're looking at the consistency in what the speaker is saying. So does the speaker appear to contradict herself or himself? And if so, why are they doing that? What's going on? We might want to check the body language of the speaker. So we might be watching a TV documentary. We might be listening, half listening to that report on the news. We might be listening to the radio or a podcast on the way to work, in the car, on the bus, or walking along. We might be thinking about their body language. If it's on the TV, looking at eye contact, the speed, tone of voice. This also could be in a sort of seminar or a lecture that you're going to. What's being said? Does the speaker look and sound as though they believe what he or she is saying? So that's listening. So within writing, we may be getting to this point where we have found those articles, we've found the book chapters and the sites that we're going to use to create that piece of work we need to put together. So when we do that and we're writing, we need to be clear about those conclusions that we've given. We need to give our line of argument or our line of reasoning that leads to that conclusion, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a few moments. We need to give the evidence that supports those points of view or supports that reasoning that we've given. And we also need to read it back critically. So not just looking at the sources critically, reading our own writing back critically as well, questioning what we've said. We're looking at that subject from multiple perspectives. And as you may have realised now, when you move through your studies, you begin to think more critically and more analytically. So when you're maybe starting off in the first year of your undergrad course, you might be writing in a more descriptive style, maybe putting the facts down, not so much questioning, but sort of giving the facts as they are. As you move through your course, and certainly at postgrad and research level, you'll be writing in a far more analytical style, rather than that very personal style or maybe journalistic style that we were using in the very start of our undergraduate courses. So now we're going to move on to some useful tools, and we've got 6 questions here that will help you trigger your critical thinking, and these questions are taken from A Beginner's Guide to Critical Thinking and Writing in Health and Social Care. Now this is a really good book, not just for that particular subject but for any discipline, in terms of breaking that critical thinking down and looking at these 6 questions. So when we're looking at those articles, we're looking at those sites that we've found, we're looking at what are the main messages, what are those results or findings, who was the target audience, so who wrote or produced the source, so who are they aiming it at, is it a particular, it might be a commercial field, it may be made for the private or public sector, we don't know yet, or for health or for education, who commissioned it, who's it aimed at, and when was the work published or updated. And this is something that does vary, the importance of this varies depending on your particular discipline. If you're working in health, medicine, science, you might want something that was published very recently. Likewise, if you're in humanities, you might want something that was published, look at something that's published some years ago and be comparing it with something that's more up to date. You're going back in time to compare things with how they are now. And where did you find that information? Where was it published? So again, this is another really important point to consider. So was it a very reliable site? Was the website recently updated? Is it something you looked at that was maybe a little bit old and you need to sort of question the relevancy and the reliability of that data? And why has this particular document or information been written or produced? So again, this goes back to the target audience. Who or why was it written? Who was it written for? And how has the author come to their particular conclusions? So again, looking at evidence, and we're looking at their arguments, and these are things that we might want to use in our own conclusions, so that's very important to bear in mind. So what, who, when, where, why and how. Those 6 questions, and these might be tools that you might want to use in some of the other activities we have. This particular tool is taken from Plymouth University, and it's looking at splitting down a piece of work into 3 parts. So we're structuring an assignment or an essay, and it can be a short piece of work, and it can be just as useful for dissertations or longer pieces of work that we might be carrying out. So we're looking at the description, the analysis, and the evaluation. And I'm just going to split those 3 areas down in the next few slides so you can see them more clearly. So the description looks at the what, where, who and when. Now you don't have to answer all of these questions, but when you're first introducing your topic within an assignment, you're looking at the context. What's the current situation, and what are the main points that I'm going to cover within this assignment? You're laying out the context for your reader, or for your supervisor or your lecturer, or the reader that you're writing for. So who's involved, who's affected, who might be interested, and when did this particular case happen, or this particular method, when was it used, who's involved in it, and you're just laying out that context in the description. And the middle part is the analysis. So the how, the whys and the what ifs. So how did this particular method or theory, when did it occur, how does it work, and why was it used? Any arguments that can be used against this particular method? What's working alongside it? What other methods have I found to compare with it? What are the alternatives? And what's good about it? Maybe what isn't so good about it? Where does it? What factors are out there? And if there are any problems, don't forget to include those as well. So that's the analysis. And then the final part's the evaluation at the end. So you've laid out your context, you've described and analysed the method or the particular topic that you're talking about. You're now going to look at what was the significance of it, why was it so convincing, or why were you convinced? Don't forget looking back at that evidence that you have. What are the implications for this particular method or topic or subject that you have discussed already? Why was it successful? And if you're doing research at a more advanced level, you can look at how it can be transferred into other disciplines. How can it be applied elsewhere? But you can also discuss this at undergrad as well, but it's not necessarily needed at that level. And your tutors or supervisors will be asking that really important question, so what? So what have I learnt? What have I been convinced? They will be looking at that. So think of these 3 areas, description, analysis and evaluation, rather like a sandwich. So you've got that top layer, the description, you've got the analysis, which is the filling of that sandwich, and then the evaluation that lays underneath, which is that sort of base layer holding everything together. So if you think of it as those 3 layers to plan and structure your assignment, and think critically as you're going along. So with those tools in mind, we're now going to be looking at another short activity, and I'm going to be looking at a daily tabloid article from the Daily Mail. So this is a newspaper article from a few years ago. It's a real article. So the headline says, under 5s glued to screens 4 hours each day. And then the subheading is, preschool children are online for an average of 71 minutes a day. Now, I've called this looking beyond the headlines, because I realise you've only got the headlines here, so you've got to kind of think about the way the reporting might go. If you imagine a person on your course or even a lecturer may have said, you've got to use this article. It's a brilliant article, you must use it. And you go away and you read it, but in this case we've only got the headlines. Have a think, if you just saw those headlines, what would you be thinking? What critical questions might you ask before you thought, yeah, I think I might use this, or question why you might use that article. Think about the impact of what they're saying might have on the educators or the teachers or any health professionals or parents even. So just take a few moments to have a think about what questions you might ask about this headline when you're reading it before you decide on whether to include it maybe in an assignment or not. Okay, and then we'll go through some suggestions. Okay, and we'll come back to the session now. I hope you found that useful. Just getting you to sort of think critically using some of those tools, the 6 questions to trigger your critical thinking, and having a think about the way you might have broken down a piece of work using that article. So I've got some questions that I asked, and I will show you those now in terms of looking at that headline. So I started off with, well, where can I find that original research? So there are some assumptions being made by that headline. So again, we've only had the headline, but if we had the whole article, we would go through it and we'd question what they're saying. So I went through that article and I picked out the original research. They did refer to Ofcom. They didn't say which particular report it was, so I dug deeper and I looked up Ofcom on that particular topic of looking at screens, and I found the report from 2016, and I've listed it below there if you want to go and have a look at it. It's online. So who conducted the research? It was Ofcom. They are the UK's communications regulator. So we hope that their credentials and qualifications are reliable because they are a government, they are UK's communications regulator. So how was the research carried out? And I hope some of you questioned, where and over what period of time this particular research was carried out. So it could have been, I don't know, it could have been over 5 years, over 1 year, over several months, and how many children were used. Was it hundreds, thousands, or maybe only a handful, 50, maybe less than that? How reliable was that research in what it was saying, for it to be able to make those claims? And how did the research define glued to screens? Now that was part of the headline that we just looked at. Now I went through that Ofcom report and I did a phrase search for glued to screens. Now I couldn't find it anywhere in that report, so that's just an indicator that the publishers of the newspaper added that in, or the editors added that in. So we do have to beware of emotive language that's used, and that's something that will crop up in any of the resources that you're reading from time to time. So just be aware of that, the type of language that's used, particularly in newspapers, but do beware when you see it. And what does screen mean? Well, we might be thinking, well, we looked at 4-year-olds, the majority might be in a nursery school, but actually we do have 4-year-olds in school as well, certainly in the UK. And they may be looking at a smart board in the classroom. They might be learning from that. They might be using a tablet at home. They might be watching the computer. They might be using an adult mobile phone, or they might be watching a TV. So there are lots of different meanings around screen. So that's something we have to break down before we then go on and discuss that. And again, questioning, is using a screen necessarily a bad thing? It could be a learning tool. As I've said, in the classroom, 4-year-olds could be looking at a smart board. They could be being taught by a teacher and they could be learning from that. They could be using a tablet and doing an online maths program, or reading an e-book on a tablet. So there are lots of different things that we need to bear in mind with that. So I'm hoping you found that activity useful, because it does get us to look at just a headline, but actually how many questions can we get just from looking at that headline? It's amazing, isn't it, how many questions we can ask just looking at that. And indeed, some students have asked whether they can actually use that Daily Mail article. Well, of course you can, but actually of more importance is the Ofcom report itself, the actual piece of evidence or the report that they used to write that article. That's our core piece of information and evidence that we can use within our assignment or our essay. Okay, I hope you found that activity useful. Now, towards the end of the session, I'm just going to go over some resources and support for you. So do have a look at the Skills for Study module. We have a critical thinking online module as part of that. It is available on our academic skills site, so do look at that link in yellow, the first link on the screen there, the academic skills site. We offer academic skills support, and the guide below links to that, so you can come and access that support. And it can be, we do offer one-to-one sessions. The Learn Online with LinkedIn Learning, the link is also there. It was lynda.com, it's now LinkedIn Learning. And also look at some of the printed books that we have. One of them Stella Cottrell, the other is Kate Williams, Getting Critical. That's a really good pocket guide that you can potentially buy yourself, but there are copies available in the library. And of course, if you're working remotely, we do have ebooks as well, and I've just listed a few here. So we've got Critical Thinking, a concise guide. We've got the Beginner's Guide to Critical Thinking and Writing in Health and Social Care. That's the one I referred to within the session. Again, it can be applied to a number of different disciplines, not just health and social care. And lastly, Journalism and Truth in an Age of Social Media, and that does look at fake news as well and how we question reports that we see in the media. A really interesting topic there. And finally, I'd just like to thank you for watching and listening to this session today, and have fun thinking critically.